when the person comes and talks about the symptoms and the difficulties of inside the mind or in one's life, it's not only what he or she said, but it's also way they made us feel through that conversation, right? And that's not the, I don't want to identify what I said to the concept of countertransference, but the emotional communication is extremely important. That is impossible with, at least as far as I know. I might be very unsophisticated. But ChatGPT would be a risky thing to do, to take it as a real therapist.
Continue talking about these stages of development,
Yeah.
and when we might start identifying with groups of people.
Right.
And also, what role individualism plays as well.
Yeah. That's a very interesting question. I think I think it also comes from philosophy, but I don't want to go to that direction necessarily to say that children, a newborn child, knows nothing about himself or herself. It's almost like guaranteed when the baby is born that certain kind of internal forces would work in a way that the child should survive. Like if the child is hungry, the child would cry. And that crying is almost like pre-programmed, or it's a pre-concept of how to behave to call the mother and get some milk and being nurtured to survive, in order to survive. Or if it's too cold, the child would use the same method. But with the growing capacity of human mind, the child starts to talk, right? So the child might say, I'm hungry, instead of crying, or say, the room is pretty cold or too hot to feel okay. So in that sense, I think child begins to learn more and more about how to relate to the environment in general, and especially with the others. And that's between those two modes of operations, I would call. The one is very realistic, and Freud used to call it the reality principle, that you're aware of reality, and also your awareness of reality implies who you are in that reality. So it's a very complex mental construction of being aware of what's in front of you and being able to contextualize yourself in that reality. So in that sense, the self-consciousness or self-awareness is something that inherits the idea of one day I will reach the full identity or the integrated ego state. And the opposite of that is I know what's in front of me, but I don't know who am I in this context, which at least implies the elements of identity crisis. So, for example, I can give you an example that I had in my practice many years ago, probably 10 years ago maybe. So there was a client of mine or a patient of mine who, when she had very first occasion of having a menstruation cycle started when she was a teenager, her panic attack started to begin. And she was extremely anxious and inconsolable. And she didn't have any idea why was she experiencing what she was experiencing. And throughout analytic therapy, she stayed in therapy more than a year and a half, but after a year and a half, she managed to understand that her father was really against her femininity, but it was completely unconscious. And she was, because they were expecting a boy in the family, and she was not accepted as a girl. And she had many experiences that I don't want to be too sort of what's the word, standard in that thinking, but the idea that certain activities in certain cultures can be taken as more boyish or girlish. And she played soccer, she was shooting, so sort of her father only accepted her without being aware of what he was doing to her when she was behaving as a boy, little boy. And it was not a problem until she proved that she was a girl by that physiological phase. And that's where her panic attack started. And that was a crack in her identity. It was like a body said, I am a girl, I'm not a boy. And that was her deep conflict, the identity conflict, identity crisis that emerged through the conflict between herself and the father's wish to have a boy, not a girl. So she was living through her father's wishful fantasy, a fantasy that like her father's wish to have a boy child, not a girl child. So,
yeah.
So if it makes sense.
Like it makes sense.
That shaped her identity.
It makes a lot of sense. So in this case, it's her familial pressure that actually is stronger than, well, it's in conflict with her authentic self,
exactly.
with her physical self,
because of the oppression.
Yeah.
By the authority.
Yeah.
In this case, a father, but in other cases, maybe a state, maybe a society itself.
Yeah, like a society.
Something related to what Freud used to call a superego, above the self.
Can you say, earlier you introduced the idea that maybe in our age, in our generation, we have a rise of identity crisis.
Yes.
Can you explain what might be going on? What's different in our society, and what does that identity crisis look like, and what does that have to do with this teenage identity crisis that Erik Erikson talked about?
Yes. Well, I know that there will be many professionals that would disagree with what I'm going to say, but I'm still going to say what I think.
Great. You will be exercising your authentic self and not letting societal pressure change you.
Yes, but this is slightly a radical idea about the possible answer on your question. That if you really go out and try to observe what's going on in this world and compare that to the version of the world we had, let's say, 30 years ago, what do you think? What are you going to notice?
Technology?
Absolutely. You will see 3-year-old children not looking at their mothers' faces, but looking at the smartphones, which is, of course, I don't want to overgeneralize that. There are many well-educated and sort of competent parents who would protect their children from that kind of stimulation. But I see that's going nowhere. I think children are more and more getting sophisticated with interacting with something, not with someone. And I think that creates deep issues with their personalities, like sort of an emptiness. That because if you're not interjecting others in your mind early enough, then your internal world is devoid of human personalities. And if you don't have internalized personalities, yourself can't be identified or can't get enough identification with those things. But you have this kind of what I called, this year I had a couple of presentations, and I called smartphones an anti-transitional object, which means the object that really interrupts human growth and human development. It really blocks the possibility to become more complex, to use language, because you use all kinds of, the generation of thumbs, and your omnipotence is profoundly linked to that. And I'm not talking about social media in this case. But that's even worse, I think, to go through socialization through your smartphone or your computer, isolated in your room. And I think that's what we see in modern world more and more. And it's a bit like when humans started living as groups, they realized that they absolutely needed something to avoid conflicts inside the group, because that's in the best interest of the group. In this case, you could use your energy to expand the group, not to divide and have internal conflicts inside the group, but to use energy to, make your group even bigger. And that's where they realized in ancient world that they needed something to make group more organized. And that something was probably some kind of religious ideas about what is right and what is wrong, and how to handle the natural environment in the best interest of the group. But also it's the beginning of law. And I think today humanity is in the state that we open this new realm of digital world. But we are not ready with our laws are not anywhere near to sort of handle that new reality. So that's why big tech companies and Silicon Valley are sort of exploiting minds to what they politely call maximize the engagement, which is a polite version of saying make people addicted on those gadgets and applications.
Yeah. And what happens when we are socialized with people because you talked about staying in your room and not socializing with real humans, but what happens when you socialize with characters in movies and TV shows, and also personalities on Instagram?
Right.
What does that do to our psychology as a child and also as an adult?
Right. That's another interesting question that is related to the difference between what do we mean when we say symbolic, because today I think that concept is altered, because on the one hand, if you use your TV screen or computer screen or your smartphone screen as sort of a more simpler or primitive version of symbolic, because it's certainly not real.
What do you mean symbolic?
I'm gonna say a little more, and probably it would make a little more sense. And if you think about meeting with someone versus seeing someone on the screen, and that experience, the real experience versus the experience that is digitally represented, the other is represented digitally, and versus getting a letter from someone. These three all of them are about relating to other, right? But it leaves profound difference, the experiential difference. Because in the first case, you can touch, you can talk, you could, feel the smell or hug or have a walk and ice cream together, or something like that, or go to the movie or theater. So it's way more, you can engage with that three-dimensionally, I would say, and it's more visceral, and it challenges your narcissistic defense. You really need to accept the other as part of your space and part of your mind, right? Yeah. But if you think about seeing the same person on the screen, it's like the screen representing, it's like an extension of your visual perception, right? And which is very different. It really limits your capacity to engage in the relationship and in the world, together in the world. It really, really limits. And you could still see the difference between getting a letter from someone, because then you employ a lot of your fantasy. You imagine how he sat down, wrote a letter, etc. So those three are very different. So going back to your question, I think the answer would be somewhere there, that the real relationships cannot be really altered in any possible ways.
Can't be replaced, you mean?
Cannot be.
Yeah.
Cannot be replaced.
Because of the three-dimensional experience of all the things that come with really being with someone.
Right.
Smell.
Yeah.
Being outside, maybe in an environment together, being fully immersed in that, so there's no other distractions. You're not texting someone while texting another person, or also being on Instagram.
Which is very depersonalizing at the same time.
And then also, if you're just watching something and not receiving any feedback, I see identity is not there. Like, you're looking at someone and you think, maybe this person doesn't even like me. They don't even know me. And you don't know what you are in relation to this person. Yes. Yeah.
I would like to use the metaphor that I heard from someone very intelligent. He said the online communication versus real feels like when you're really thirsty, and instead of getting a glass of water, getting some droplets. It is something, but it's your unconscious and your visceral, emotional part of your personality is never satisfied with that kind of thing.
And how is it that we can get addicted to those droplets? Because sometimes, like many people, they actually stop being social. They stop wanting to go out and getting that real experience, and they crave those droplets.
Yes, absolutely. Because it provides something, you're not alone. It creates an illusion of not being alone, because you're relating to something, and that something represents someone or a group or the world, etc. But all you need to do is to sit passively and not to be engaged in many different ways. It doesn't mean I'm against technology. I'm not anti-technological, but I think intensely, or I'm trying to think intensively about what are the healthy ways to use technology versus being used by technology. Right. So that's what I could say about that.
Yeah, great. So maybe we should wrap up soon, because you have 20 more minutes until your next client or so.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about our conversation about AI.
Right. Yes.
Because we were talking about a person who used AI as a therapist and actually cried about it.
Yeah.
And that was very interesting to you. And like you said, you're not anti-technology. You found that quite interesting and eye-opening. It's more about being very mindful about how we use technology, how we use these tools, and not let them use us, like you just said very well. Do you have any more thoughts on this theme of AI?
Yes. Well, I have more and more sessions with people who talk a lot about their conversations with ChatGPT. And quite often what they say is that they're really concerned about that, because now you can't really tell the difference between having a conversation with ChatGPT and versus having a conversation with a real human being. And I think some people are overly excited about that achievement, even though we know at this point that there is no subjectivity in ChatGPT. ChatGPT is not someone. It is simulating, and mostly, it's language-based and language models. And this conversational ChatGPT that was introduced, I think, in 2022, was a big step forward in that sense. And I think I see a lot of potential benefits for humanity. But also I think everybody knows that there are also dangers. And I think in this case, the danger is that people might misuse it, and we have a special term for that in psychotherapy. We call it the iatrogenic intervention, which means some kind of therapeutic interaction and intervention that makes even more damage to a person instead of helping someone, damaging even more. And I think that's probably what would happen in most people unless maybe high-tech companies hiring some therapists, not some therapists, but important professionals in our field. And my strong recommendations would be to let more psychoanalysts work on those models to make it less harmful. And once the model might see a person needs deeper work than what's possible on ChatGPT, ChatGPT might be amazing in diagnosing people, in a sense that, in a very manualized sense. And I hate to say this, because when we psychoanalysts think about diagnostic process, we often say the countertransference, which is a complicated concept, but I think my colleagues would understand that quite well, is really in the center of diagnostic process. In other words, when the person comes and talks about the symptoms and the difficulties of inside the mind or in one's life, it's not only what he or she said, but it's also way they made us feel through that conversation, right? And that's not I don't want to identify what I said to the concept of countertransference, but the emotional communication is extremely important. That is impossible with, at least as far as I know. I might be very unsophisticated. But ChatGPT would be a risky thing to take it as a real therapist. And I think at this point I read that 80% of people use ChatGPT as a therapist or as a friend.
Yeah.
Which is about connection. And you can't really connect with something that is not the other, but is a simulation of someone.
Yeah, super eye-opening. And so many different paths to go down. This is your profession. You've been digging into these topics for years, and well, we just had a little more than 1 hour session and learned a lot. But I hope to have more episodes with psychologists on specifically these topics. I think there's so much to talk about. About society, about authenticity. We didn't I'm interested in this area of identity.
Right.
And so much more.
Authentic self.
Yeah, the authentic self.
Yeah, which is I think extremely important in modern world.
Yeah.
Because it's getting more and more false and artificial, I guess, in a negative sense. That the social media that we internalize the experience of being on the social media platforms is a bit like living in the place where you never really have boundary between self and the others. Like it's always being with the other. It's a version of always being with the other, always being accessible for others.
Yeah.
And then I think that really challenges the idea of being an individual, even though we talk and we think about Western culture as based on individualism, but this new reality, I think, profoundly challenges this idea. So we're more like a global village, as Marshall McLuhan said.
Yeah. Actually, I thought of what I was thinking about regarding what you said about these AI, and you said it can be very dangerous to use AI as your therapist, especially when it's not programmed for that. But I think there's a temptation in myself that I think is a temptation in many people, that they would say, yeah, it's probably not perfect. It's definitely far from perfect. But what's the other case? Would I do therapy on myself? Like, or, you know, obviously there's always the option to get a therapist, but there's a lot of reasons why people don't do that.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't live in a country where they feel like it's so available. They don't feel like it's financially available. They're afraid of it. They don't know what it is. You know, all the reasons. And then ChatGPT is so available. And when we and we'd say like, yeah, it's not also going to be perfect if I do journaling and self-reflection, right?
Right.
And like, what would you say to that?
Well, I think the reality is that people use it as therapists, and that is reality. And the question is, what's the best way to handle this kind of reality? And I think the best way would be if we make conversational ChatGPT, when a person asks ChatGPT to behave as a therapist, and which goes to the ethical issues of high-tech companies as well, that they should hire, you know, enough amount of good enough professionals to make it at least less harmful, less risky, more helpful, and potentially leading to real therapy, the actual therapy process, if it's possible and when it's necessary. I don't think psychotherapy is always necessary. I see it's often necessary and almost always desirable to help humans to be more aware and to have you know, rich internal life. Not only the life happens to you, but also you are emotionally involved in this, and you're aware, and you experience yourself as a subject, as subjectivity, the entity or human being that has subjective world, internal world, not as I don't know who I am, but I don't know what's happening in front of me when I think about my life, but in terms of more complex and highly organized a being that is a human being, potentially, not always, of course. And I think high-tech companies, if they at least critically think about what they're doing and think in terms of not only maximize the engagement and how to get more profit, but how to help people more and how to optimize. I have nothing against, you know, the business projects that, if not 100%, mostly based on expanding a profit, how to make it more profitable, but also using more ethical principles and internalizing more humanistic values, I would say.
Yeah.
Briefly,
yeah.
It's really about kindness, not only about business.
Yeah, it ties back into what you said about the new world without laws to govern it.
Yes, exactly.
And also what you just mentioned,
Yeah.
kindness. Like, we don't need laws to tell us to do the right thing. People could, you know, the big companies with the resources, they could also just think ethically sometimes.
Yes, because they have tremendous psychological power over humanity.
Yes.
The new Rome is in Silicon Valley, and nearly all digital paths, one way or another, ends that part of the world.
Yeah, you and I, as you world travelers, as you live in 2 countries far apart from each other. Have a good sense of this world village, I think.
Yes.
So I think it's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah. thank you very much for having me at your podcast. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure for me as well. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you too.